I'm going to engage in clickbait. Yeah, that's right. I'm not above it. I keep seeing all over YouTube. I keep seeing all these video titles about, is this game the D&D killer? And I'm going to chime in, because who doesn't need to hear from yet another middle-aged white dude playing tabletop RPGs what they think about stuff? So here we go. Darrington Press, the publishing company that the people from Critical Role that they run, I guess. I don't know. I don't care. They're apparently putting out another new tabletop RPG. Last year they put out one, Candela Obscura, which, of course, caused a kerfluffle. Kerfuffle. I can't use words. Whatever. It's not like I talk for a living. Anyway, Candela Obscura caused a kerfuffle because of various things. People didn't like the way the safety tools were phrased. People didn't like that the mechanics were not entirely original. People didn't like blah, 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 blah. Fine. If you don't like it, don't buy it. It's not a difficult equation as far as I can tell, but okay. So now they've announced, I guess they announced a while back, but now it's actually coming out in like a play test. Their newest game, oh gosh, I don't even remember the name of it now. But whatever it is, it's their new D&D-esque game. Probably the game that they're going to switch to playing on their live play. That would be my guess. I don't know. I don't make their decisions. And I don't care. I don't watch the show. And the game came out, or the play test came out, and people, of course, were losing their mind. Why? Well, because it's got this rule or that rule that maybe they either don't like or they've never tried before, and so assume that it's terrible or whatever. And maybe it is terrible. I don't know. I haven't read the document. I don't particularly intend to read the document. Much like Candela Obscura, their new game, Daggerheart, their new game doesn't particularly interest me. Between the two, Candela Obscura is more interesting to me, but I don't really like that particular mix of Edwardian, Gothic, horror, fantasy. I think maybe Edwardian horror might have been interesting, although I've got Call of Cthulhu. It's not that hard to set it 10 years earlier or 10 years later, depending on which version of it you're doing. And Vassen's already out there, which I'd be more inclined to pick up because I like a lot of Free League's stuff already. I already am sort of a buyer of many Free League products, and so I'd probably pick up Vassen or Wassen. However, I don't speak Scandinavian. Sorry. I know there's more than one Scandinavian. I'm an ignorant American, but I'm not that ignorant. I don't speak Swedish, Danish. I really don't speak Danish, Norwegian, or barely even English. So anyway, along with all the people who are upset, in much the same way they were upset about Shadow Dark, which I still strongly suspect most of the reason people were upset by Shadow Dark is it was designed by a woman. But Shadow Dark got a lot of flack for not being original when it came to its mechanics and various things like that. And I don't think at any point along the line did anybody involved with that game say that it was original. They said it was essentially, I mean, what it is, from what I understand, I didn't pick it up because it also does not interest me, is essentially like a very intense homebrew system. It's trying to synthesize, I think, the superheroics of post-3rd edition D&D with the supposed grittiness of pre-3rd edition D&D. My argument is that level-based systems have always been essentially superheroic, and it's part of why I never really liked level-based systems, but that's a different discussion. Was Shadow Dark a D&D killer? No. Was it ever going to be? No. Did anybody say it was going to be, other than people going for clickbaity topics on headlines on videos and articles? No, it was not supposed to be a D&D killer. In fact, I think Shadow Dark in particularly was really meant for people who had been into 5e, or who were into 5e, or getting into 5e, but then thought, I'd like something a little tougher. I'd like something a little darker. I'd like something a little more challenging. So it's meant, in a sense, to port you from 5e into tougher games. Okay, that's great. Good for everybody involved with that. I see nothing wrong with that in any way, shape, or form. Candela Obscura, whatever. It doesn't light my fire, but somebody had an idea. Their setting is unique enough that it is not the same as Vaesen. It is not the same as Call of Cthulhu. It's unique enough. It's just not interesting to me. And that's fine. Not everything has to be for me. But now I'm seeing again with Daggerheart, it has different mechanics. Its mechanics are not just a 5e clone like many out there. And I'm seeing it with that, and I'm seeing it, of course, with the MCDM Kickstarter, the MCDM role-playing game, which apparently has a name now, it just hasn't been officially announced. And I guess it's sort of refreshing that so much ire has been directed at the MCDM role-playing game, because Matt Colville is famously a man, and it's nice to see a sort of non-gender specific lash out by angry internet yahoos. If that's a silver lining, I guess. But I think part of it is, like Daggerheart, like Shadow Dark, and like some other games, MCDM's RPG is whatever it turns out to be. It will be an opinionated game. And it really does seem that if anybody has an opinion on how games should be run, and it doesn't mean how all games should be run, it means how their game should be run, then people lose their mind because they don't share that opinion. I see it with OSR people who freak out because of a new supplement that comes out for 5e, something like Strixhaven, which is like the Harry Potter for 5e, or heaven forbid there's an African-American creator or a black woman on the cover or what have you, then they lose their dang minds because how dare they? It's usual internet nonsense. But are these games, is MCDM, is it meant to be a D&D killer? No. It's not going to be a D&D killer. And I know I've said this in previous videos. I know I've certainly said it online in various places. There is one D&D killer and one D&D killer alone. And that is the company that owns D&D. This was true in the 80s and early 90s when TSR did everything in their power to destroy it. And this is true now with Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast doing what they can to destroy it. The only D&D killer is the company that runs D&D. It's, for better or worse, I would say generally speaking for worse, but that's an opinion. D&D is synonymous with the hobby. As long as people get together online or around a table and play tabletop RPGs, as long as that happens, D&D can have a place in that. Will it? I don't know. I don't know what Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro are going to do. My assumption is they will weather the storm and keep putting it out, and people will continue to complain about everything that they release for it. I tend to agree with Professor Dungeon Master on this. I think that Hasbro/Wizards is going to try to push it more and more as an online thing. But I think for multiple reasons, it's never going to be fully that. In part because part of what makes this hobby what it is the social interaction element of it. And we saw that already in the late 90s when people fled the hobby for video games and multiplayer multiplayer, online, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And the hobby went through a real tough time, but then it came back. And it came back because people missed human interaction, real human interaction. Seeing faces, seeing people, sharing meals, having discussions, making friendships in a way that is not necessarily impossible, but is not encouraged by online play. And certainly not by online video games, where you're not likely to see people. And it's why there's so much toxic behavior, because people have a certain level of anonymity, which you don't have around a game table. And so civilization happens when you're around a game table. So D&D killers. There aren't any. And there don't need to be, and there shouldn't be. And this coming from somebody who does not like Dungeons and Dragons, I think that, I don't think it's a great game, but I know that people like it. I have never enjoyed it. I frankly don't see its appeal. I think it's a terrible introduction to the hobby. Obviously, it has worked. It has worked for, I guess at this point, probably millions of people. But I just don't understand how. Because I mean, I'm not a stupid person, and I bounce off it every time I try. It's not even just that it's not complicated. I find it complicated, but it's the editions that I have tried to read have been not very well written or very well explained. The rules are clunky. They felt out of date when I got into this hobby in the late 80s. And they've not really substantially improved. And ultimately, the game, it has an opinion, even though I don't think anybody really seems to know that it has an opinion. It's a game about killing monsters and taking their stuff. And if that's not what you want to do, then it's not a great game. Because that's what the game is. It's a game about killing monsters and taking their stuff. And when you're doing stuff that isn't that, you are using it in a way that it isn't really designed for. And that's fine. And maybe people have tried to design pieces onto it and attachments and various things like that. But, it's like any time, if you use a coffee grinder to grind spices, maybe it works, but maybe it's not what it was really meant for. And so maybe it doesn't work as well as a spice grinder or a mortar and pestle or whatever, because it's not what it was designed to do. Doesn't mean it doesn't work. Just means maybe it's not as good as something that was designed to do something else. Yeah. So these are all kinds of different games, and they all try to capture different things. They all have opinions on how things should be done, and they aren't all about killing monsters and taking their stuff. None of these, no matter how good it is a D&D killer. And it's never going to be. How many people want to play a game about martial arts and melodrama, essentially? A game about, I dubbed it as fists and feelings, because it is about all of the sadness of fighting for your life. And it's really cool, but look, it's a kind of complicated game. Also, it doesn't use any dice. It doesn't use any luck at all. It is, there's some strategy in it, but there's no luck. And it's not about beating your enemy. It's about dealing with the repercussions of violence. It's pretty cool. But it's not D&D. And it's not a D&D killer because it isn't trying to do what D&D does. Matrons of Mystery. A cozy game about solving mysteries in a little British village a la, oh gosh, I can't even remember any of the British shows. I always think of Murder, She Wrote, but the British version of that. Is this supposed to be a D&D killer? 1,000 people could play this tomorrow, and it's not going to kill D&D because it's not doing what D&D did. You want fantasy. Ars Magica. This is not about killing monsters and taking their stuff, even though you might actually kill a monster and take its stuff at some point. This is about politics and building power and wizardry in the Middle Ages and the struggle between the divine, the magic, the infernal, and the fairy, and all of that sort of thing. And it involves a massive cast of characters and complications and a magic system that is, I think, second to none, but also takes a while to get used to. And it's amazing, but it's not a D&D killer. It's never going to be. They're putting out a new version of the 5th edition coming up. It's supposed to be like, I think, nicer art, because the design on this is meh. But it's supposed to be better design, I think, more clearly written, etc., etc. But even that, it's not going to kill D&D. Never going to do it. Cyberpunk. This isn't D&D, and this is a combat-heavy game like D&D. This is a game where violence and action happen a lot. But it's a cyberpunk game. It's telling a completely different story, a different type of story, a totally different environment. Things mean different things. Heroics are different. It's a totally different game. How about this? This is somebody's take essentially on, what if I took a lot of the elements of Dungeons and Dragons that I like and made my own game that's super easy to run? And it's not Dungeons and Dragons, but it is, kinda. But it's a version of it. It's not even like OSR. It's its own thing, but you can't help but see the DNA in there. It's not going to kill D&D. People aren't going to pick this up on the shelf and just go straight to this, chances are. But again, like Shadow Dart, which I believe takes some things from this, with credit, not saying it was theft, it's with credit, like Shadow Dart, it's a step. It's for all those people that started with D&D but want something else. They can look at this. It's not so far off that they won't recognize it if they are comfortable with D&D, but it is different, and that helps break that mold. Thirsty Sword Lesbians. This is not going to be the game that people go to, generally speaking, instead of D&D. Some people might, but probably most won't. This is the first Powered by the Apocalypse game where I was reading the rules, and I think I understood how Powered by the Apocalypse would work at the table. I've been saying for quite some time I really need to play a Powered by the Apocalypse game because I just don't quite get it. And when I read the rules in various books, I have not really understood. This time I did. I get it. And I think it'd be a blast. But this isn't going to be people's first game. You know, it's not killing D&D. High fantasy with combat, although deadly combat. High fantasy with that. It's Bronze Age fantasy, but you're standing by gods. You're dealing with monsters. You've got, everybody in this game uses magic. Magic is part of everything you do. It's a wonderful game. It's a complicated system, but it takes off of basic role-playing, which is not. Basic role-playing is a wonderful and easy system to learn, and I'd argue a better beginner system than a lot, but RuneQuest makes it more complicated, and the lore is immense, but you don't need all of that. Is this going to be a D&D killer? Nope. It's a heck of a lot cheaper to get into than D&D, I'll tell you that. This starter set will have probably months, certainly weeks of play in it, probably more, and this is $30. List price. And this has adventures and rules, pre-generated characters, and all kinds of goodness. Speaking of the same company, Call of Cthulhu, this is not D&D. This is almost like the polar opposite of D&D if you're still dealing with games that have combat and dice and all of that sort of thing. But on that spectrum, it's almost the complete opposite. This is definitely not about killing monsters and taking their stuff. This is about finding out about monsters and then running like hell before they get you. This is a game where your heroics aren't about what you can defeat, but how long you can delay the eventual loss. You aren't trying to find and kill Cthulhu. You're trying to stop Cthulhu this week. You're trying to stop the Elder Gods for now. And if you have to die or go insane in order to delay them, that's where your heroics come in. And yeah, you're probably going to die or go insane. That's part of the fun of this game. Come on. There's nothing like D&D in this. This is a popular franchise. This is a great rule set. Could this be extremely successful? I think so. I think it's been pretty successful. Is it ever going to sell the numbers of D&D? Probably not. It's just not going to have that level of market saturation. Does it kill D&D? No. If 1 million people went out and bought this tomorrow, it would not kill D&D. More fantasy. Arthurian legend. Half of D&D, it feels like, is based on Arthurian legend. This is a totally different kind of story. This is legacy storytelling. This is about building generational effect. This is not your hero going out and slaying the dragon. They might. But in slaying that dragon, they're setting up for their community to be more successful, for their next generation to be more successful. Because it's about a lasting effect and creating a better world and all of that sort of thing over generations. And finally, well, not quite finally. Let's skip to this one. Yellow King, the Yellow King. What is this? This is an alternate 19th and 20th century, maybe even beyond. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've looked at it. This is an alternate timeline based on Robert W. Chambers' mythos about the King in Yellow play and character. And it's like super creepy and weird and uncomfortable and just sort of surreal. And it's using the gumshoe system, if I remember correctly, from Trail of Cthulhu. And there's nothing about it that's like D&D. Nothing about it. You know, there's probably not much in the way of combat. If there is combat, it's probably deadly. It's about storytelling and mood and weirdness. And even with True Detective being super popular and the King in Yellow being mentioned and all of that sort of thing, that didn't make this game somehow super successful, sell 1 million copies and kill D&D. And it never will. And then the same with Dungeon Crawl Classics, which I have multiple times said, this game feels to me like somebody looked at Dungeons & Dragons and said, what if this game was actually fun? And then they made this. And this is very popular. They do the smart thing. Goodman Games does the smart thing and has opened this up to a lot of third-party content creation, which I do think is part of what led to Dungeons & Dragons being successful in the 70s and into the early 80s. A lot of third-party people were designing, frankly, better material than TSR was putting out at the time. I'm not going to get into it, but I don't necessarily think that a lot of the work done by certainly one of the major producers of Dungeons & Dragons was especially approachable or enjoyable. And so it fell to third-party publishers to make material that really captured other people. And it was in part thanks to them that we got a lot of other types of games coming out as well. But this is, I think, a wonderful take on the Dungeons & Dragons concept. They've taken some of the basics of the rules and warped them into a way that is much more enjoyable to play. For me, certainly. And it captures its own thing, and in it, it has an opinion again. I talk about opinionated games a lot, but this is not 5e. This is not grand heroics. This is wild, weird, down and dirty, out in space, tripping balls, crazy, high action nuttiness. And I've said before, kind of like Paranoia, it's less about thinking from your character's point of view, which you can still do, but it's less about that and more about watching the insanity that happens to your character. I think I referenced it at one point as being a third-person game versus a first-person game, which makes it, again, opinionated, and that's great. As big as this is, and they sold a ton during the debacle last year, beginning of 2023. They sold a ton. A lot of people are coming to this game. A lot of people, I think, who wanted to get into D&D back in the 70s and 80s, or maybe did, but lost interest. People like me who saw all that D&D stuff and thought, this looks like so much fun. And then we played D&D and it sucked. This made all of that stuff, all of those images and all of that fun that it looked like it was going to be, and it wasn't. This made the game fun. If anything were going to kill D&D, I think it would be this. Or, that's not true. I don't think it would be this. I think it should be this, if anything were going to, but nothing's going to, and that's okay, because we don't need a dead D&D. In fact, I love that D&D is out there. It's out there recruiting tons and tons and tons of people to this hobby. And yes, unfortunately, some of them will be like me. They'll get into, I didn't get into D&D, but if I had, they will play D&D a bunch, say, this isn't very fun. It's not the fun that is promised. And I'm going to leave. And they might be people who think that's what the hobby is and never get back into it. But hopefully, more people are going to play D&D for a while and say, I don't know, it's all right, but is there something else out there? And there is. There's a lot of something else out there. And that's all right. That's why I think Darrington Press is great. I'm not going to buy the game because I'm not interested, but I don't need to. I have a whole bunch of other games that I am interested in, and I'll buy those. But somebody out there is going to look at that Darrington Press game and say, this looks great. I'll pick this up. They're going to look at the MCDM thing. They're going to watch a crap ton of Matt Colville videos, like I have, and then they're going to say, I want to pick up this guy's game. Heck, I've almost picked up, I've already forgotten the name, Shadow Dark, only because it looks so well designed. I've thought about picking up the MCDM RPG game based purely on how well designed it is. I've talked myself out of it because it's just not something I'm interested in. I don't like heavy combat tactical type games at all. So the idea of one where that's a core principle is just a straight non-starter for me. So I'm not going to pick it up, but I love that it's out there. And for the people who do like that, that's great. So anyway, that's my video about D&D killers. It's a stupid idea. I'm sorry for just saying it outright. The only D&D killer is now, and ever shall be, the company that owns Dungeons & Dragons. Any other game and its success is something that we can celebrate, even if we aren't going to play it. I'm not interested in Shadow Dark. I'm not interested in Candela Obscura. I'm not interested in whatever it is that Cobalt Press is doing. I'm not interested in Pathfinder or Pathfinder 2 or Starfinder. I'm not interested in any of that, and that's okay. Somebody is, and it's wonderful. It's a great hobby that's got something for everybody, and I love it. All right, anyway, that's me ranting. If you enjoyed this at all, leave a comment below, like, subscribe, all the usual stuff. Check out my links below where you can support me in some way or other. Anyway, that's me jumping on the clickbait bandwagon, probably a couple weeks late when this posts. Have a good day.